Okay, we're going to be learning a good morning, a kind of a difficult mimer, and we'll try to get through it as best as possible on this week's parsha. Let's bring up the mimer. The mimer is based loosely um, on what we learned to speak on in the Torah. So this is from the year Shabbos Parashas Shmois, the 23rd of Teves, Mevarchim Shvat, the year Tafshin Yutes of 1959. So the pasuk says, "Vayem Hashem elav misam pel adam." Again, this is the same title of the Maamar Torah we learned on Sunday night. It says, "Misam pel adam." Moshe is complaining that he can't speak; he has a speech impairment. Hashem responds, "Misam pel adam." Who gives man a mouth to man? Oy mi yasam ilam. Who makes a person to be a mute, or cherish, or deaf, or pekech, or wise, smart? It's me, God. The Yishami says, this is based on like a Yishami, like a Medrash idea. When Moshe ran away from Pharaoh. So we learned in today's reading, the third reading, that Moshe is found out to be the one who killed the Egyptian, and Pharaoh pursues him, and Moshe runs away and ends up in Midian. So it says, Moshe runs from Paroi, all the people. Achlusim means kind of the population. We're referring to the population of the people that were chasing him. Some people became mutes. Some people became deaf. Some people became blind. So they asked the people who were pursuing Moshe, they asked the mutes, Heichen Moshe, where's Moshe? So they couldn't speak because they're mutes. They asked the deaf people, didn't hear what they were asking. They asked the blind people, they didn't see, obviously couldn't see where Moshe was. So it's obviously referring to the local. Moshe wasn't part of the Jewish population at that time, so we're talking about the local Egyptian population. This is what Moshe, the God tells Moshe. Moshe is asking about his speech impairment. So God says, one second, this whole idea that you don't have a mouth, that you think you don't have a speech, and other things that you've seen happened around you. For instance, the fact that people became mutes and became deaf and blind when when the Egyptians were pursuing, when Pharaoh's soldiers were pursuing him to be killed for killing the Egyptian. So we see that it's basically Hashem, the Misham is saying, basically you see miracles around you. You see that for your own safety, for your own savior, to save you, God created all these miracles. So then you should be obvious to you, even now. When you say, I can't go to Pari because I can't talk properly, means you're Melumet Benisim. You've seen miracles happening around you, and you saw how you escaped. Pharaoh was miraculous. So why are you concerned? Don't worry about it. Basically, don't worry about it. So based on this, Shami, the Rebbe asked the question. In order for Moshe to be saved, this wasn't the easiest option. Is to make some people mute, some people of Pharaoh's servants deaf, and some others blind. God, if he was looking to make an easier miracle, he had the miracle that happened affected all the people that saw Moshe, that they couldn't communicate, either because they were mutes or couldn't hear or couldn't see, where Moshe was, where he was running. God could have made a more simple miracle. The Moshe should become invisible. I mean, if you have to make a miracle about one individual or many individuals, go with the one individual. It's an easier miracle. The Moshe become invisible. There are all those who were in contact with Moshe, who saw Moshe, and that there were plenty of evidently, that they all had different miracles that happened, either to become deaf, deaf, or mute, or blind. So that's much more complicated. That they become deaf, mutes, and blind. If you have to make a miracle for one person, is hunekel b'yaser in the work of a miracle. If you have to make a miracle that affects many people. What kind of questions that? That's a person who has to toil to do something. So then you have to choose the easier over the heavier, but the more difficult. But Hashem, everything is, there's no such thing as difficult or easy for God. So he can decide whatever he wants. He can make a miracle like this, or he can make a miracle like that. Who call Yachov? God has no limitation. Call B'Shavat, like everything is equal. It means even to do many miracles is equal to do one miracle. So this is what he decided. So what's the question? Nevertheless, we have a marker, a source to ask this question. Why? Because Metzinim B'Divrei Rizal, we do find, Chazal talk about an idea that says, Haloshin Kosher L'Zavgam Kikiris Yamsuf. That there's a concept that's brought down, I believe it's more cited, that says about making a shidduch, a match, right? That says it's difficult to match sometimes people together, as difficult as it was for God to split the Red Sea. So what do we see? That we define the concept of splitting the Red Sea, which is a great miracle, as a concept of difficulty. And we're comparing that. Making a shidduch is as difficult as it is to split the Red Sea. If you want to say that there's no such thing as levels of miracles by God, so what's the comparison specifically to the Red Sea? You could say that there's no difficulty, or you could say that if you want to say that miracles are different, you could say it's different. So to say, like any miracle, why specifically displaying the Red Sea? Because it's an intense miracle. So we see there's different levels. Because it was so abnormal, such a miracle, that water should stand still like that. It's against the nature of water. So that's a complicated miracle. So we see there's a concept of a complicated miracle, as complicated it is to make a shidduch. Even though we do know that everything's equal by Hashem, we still see that there's a concept. God decided that the world should run at a certain kind of natural way. So therefore, any way of breaking nature is going against the preconditions that God made within creation of nature. It means to make a smaller miracle where it affects nature is better or easier, so to say, based on the conditions that God preconditioned in creation, and to make something that's more complicated against nature, like splitting the Red Sea. So therefore, what we define as a difficult miracle is the more it breaks the laws of nature. Where some miracles are not breaking the laws of nature, it's just that in this specific scenario, the nature would say it has to be a certain way, and it comes a miracle that it doesn't happen, or it does happen in a different way. But here, the rules of nature were broken for Kriyas Yamsuf, and God conditioned that creation should be based on certain rules. So to break the laws of nature is complicated because God preconditioned it so. So we see that this idea of levels of miracle. This is understood. When with regard to miracles, it does make a difference if it's a big miracle or small miracle, because every miracle is breaking what should be the natural happening, if not for the miracle. And the fact that Kriyas Yamsuf is a great change of nature, therefore we say that it's like a shidduch, which is a great change, that it's not difficult. So we see there's different levels. The greater the miracle, how do you kosher? Yes, it's more difficult based on the precondition that God put into creation. As it says, where you have a concept, you have a miracle within a miracle. You have a regular miracle, and then you have a miracle within the miracle. So you see that itself makes it more of a special miracle, or you could say more of a complicated miracle. I mean, and he says that this idea that we have miracles, we can understand from in general the whole idea of avodah. Why? He says, what does it mean to bring down? Let's start going into the Maamar of this idea. What does it mean that through avodah, a person brings down godliness in the world different or more than godliness is in creation? So here we're starting to get into the idea, which is like similar to what we spoke about in Torah, which was coming from a different angle of this challenge, of this question of what is the idea of Torah mitzvos? I mean, Torah mitzvos, the world has Torah mitzvos is to bring Gilui, to bring godliness down to this world, to bring godliness in the world. So the godliness is in the world. The whole creation is godliness. It means if you look at it from a perspective of that there's nothingness, and because it's creation, there's what's called yesh mi'ayin, something from nothing, and the idea that there is a yesh, that there is something itself as a creation, not just that there's something that was created, but the fact that there can be something as perceived as is itself is godliness. So what is the difference between looking at God's creation and Torah mitzvahs? Everything is godliness. So nevertheless, we see that there's an idea, what does it mean to reveal godliness in the world that happens through avodah adam, through a person's service, which is different than godliness in the world as in creation. It's not an edited mimer, so therefore you have to hold saying Yiddish haltkot, and it's a complicated mimer. So kind of pivoted into this question right away, as opposed to kind of clarifying first the original question about Moshe. Okay, so he says like this: godliness as is in creation, means what does it mean? That yes, of course, creation is godliness, but you don't see it as godliness. The person looks at the world and thinks, the world is either God created, and like Paris says, God left the world, or you don't even for the person who doesn't want to even recognize God's handiwork in the world, because you can look at the world and you can have arguments of science, evolution, other things that will say, who says it's a God? I mean, there are those who have that question, right? So there's a concept means that there's godliness in creation, is behelm hester, is concealed. So what does it mean? Avodah. Avodah is to reveal godliness in what seems like a godless place. This is God wants that the revelation of godliness shouldn't come, not even in a way of a person says, "Oh, I see that the world is a creator," but to bring additional godliness in creation beyond even to reveal the godliness within creation. Means you could say, okay, if I want to bring Gilui Likus, what am I going to do? I'm going to reveal that this creation that maybe is concealed godliness. Okay, I'm going to show someone and prove someone that really is godliness. That's not just what avoid is. Avoid is not just to reveal the godliness in creation, but to bring an additional godliness in creation. And that comes through avoid it through toil and through service. And although the whole purpose of creation was that God wanted that godliness should be revealed, it's not meant to become easy. It's meant to come through work. And the work is through the Torah mitzvos, that a person has to work on themselves, and through the Torah mitzvos, Mashanat Avamidais, of changing not just the world, but yourself via Torah mitzvos. That's all avodah. That's all about revealing godliness in the world. And that has to come through avodah, through toil. And this is an example of the difference between Hagas Teves and Hagas Nisis. The way things go naturally, that's the hell and the hester, that's how godliness is concealed in the world. And there's then Haganisis, there's the miraculous, and the miraculous is like just like in a miracle. Like we said, it's a difficult miracle, so too an avoided is the concept of the difficulty to bring godliness in the world. So to say, God's miracles mirrors our avodah, and that's what we're going to get to, that specifically because the miracle of Moshe Rabbeinu was difficult. There was an easier way, but the purpose of the miracle is to have godliness revealed. So therefore, in the two options that God had in this case, between showing a revealed miracle, a simple miracle of making Moshe invisible, or affecting all the people around him, which would require many miracles. He goes with the many miracles specifically versus the easier miracle. Because the level of godliness that the world keeps on existing, like it says, that the world exists day and night and doesn't cease to exist because godliness makes it so. That comes on its own. That's nature. You don't need nature to keep the world in existence. When Hashem says that the world was dependent on Torah mitzvahs, doesn't mean that the world was dependent on Torah mitzvahs to be in existence. The world was dependent on Torah mitzvahs to be in existence because God willed it so that this idea that He created that there should be a world and a Teves of the world, He only wanted it so there should be people doing Torah mitzvahs. If there's no people doing Torah mitzvahs, the Yisrael doesn't do Torah mitzvahs, no longer wants the world. But the world itself, the ratzin for the world, the godliness in the world doesn't need Torah mitzvahs to be in existence. It's just that the only reason why God willed that there should be this existence is dependent on Torah mitzvahs. So if you look at it separate, so then the idea is that for the world to be in existence, it doesn't need avodah. But God's basically saying, but if there will be no avodah, then I don't want the world. That's the idea of nature. You don't need avodah for the world to keep in existence. But that for godliness to be revealed in the world, and that's what we said through avodah. That's the concept of the miracle. And because we said that for the godliness to be revealed comes through avodah, so therefore the miracle has that in this case about Moshe Rabbeinu, because it's about the question that Moshe is asking about the mission, and the mission is about the beginning of Yetzias Mitzrayim, at least the Matan Torah, has to be in a way of avoided, the more difficult of the two miracle options of the miracle. That's avoided that behind the fish is onion kasha because the miracle is difficult, and in our case, the miracle itself is of the options is the difficult option. Has to come through toilet. And that's what God is basically showing Moshe. The fact that Moshe says, how can I communicate? What does this mean? Again, we're going to tap into the ideas of the Torah, or what does it mean, Torah mitzvos? What does it mean that I'm going to the world of tikkun, etc.? So God says to him, you don't have a mouth, but the idea of Torah mitzvos comes through avodah. So therefore, the heart of the miracle, the heart of the avodah, misunderstood. That the miracle between, I'm kind of going into the answer to the question at the same time, the miracle between God, that God had the option with Moshe Rabbeinu to either make it with one person or with many people. So many people is more difficult, therefore requires more avodah. So it's in the initial question of so the Shah is, but why is it that we have to choose the harder miracle? Why do we have to choose the harder avodah? If avodah is the more difficult the miracle, the more difficult avodah, why is it taka, the idea that we're looking for harder avodah to bring in more gilulikus? Why can't we just bring gilulikus in the most simple way? If Teves is natural, godliness revealed in the world is through miracles, so we go for the easiest way to bring a miracle. Why does it have to be specifically the most difficult of the miracle? But we're going to go back to what I said initially. His idea is that's the whole point. The point is really, the question is really the answer itself, is that we're looking for the avodah kasher because of the hari of gilulikus. In the two choices, you could have gone with the easier choice. And I heard the Rebbe ask another question. Seemingly here, the Rebbe goes into that if you look at the actual text of the pasuk, it seems that it means if you want to translate based on the Shalmi in the most simple terms, without kind of analyzing the text, you'd say that Moshe is saying, I don't have a mouth, a voice, I can't talk properly. So God's saying, who gives a mouth? Who makes people deaf? Who makes people mute? Who makes people blind? But talking is the normal thing. Moshe Rabbeinu, it's not a miracle. That's kind of you're putting it all in one line. So why is the pasuk saying, who gives a mouth? Who makes people deaf? Who makes people mute? Who makes people blind? There's two different things. Moshe has a question that he can't speak, and here you're adding that there was miracles. So from this we learn that actually what God was really telling him that there was 4 miracles, not just the 3 miracles of deaf, blind, and mute, but also the fact that there's a mouth is the miracle. And what miracle are we talking about? He says, again, in the verse itself says, Misam Peladam, who gives the mouth to the person? That the miracle started right now. That he's saying that there's also a miracle right now that Moshe could start speaking. We see Moshe continues to bring up the idea that he has a speech impairment. So what does it mean that there was a miracle of his speech where there was no miracle? That in fact his speech, he hasn't been healed. He said Medrash is a separate Medrash that brings down this question. When it talks about these are the words of Moshe, says the Medrash says, where's Moshe get speech? Moshe says he has a speech impairment. Then all of a sudden he says, these are the words of Moshe as if he speaks without a problem. Matan Torah, the Medrash says that Moshe was healed. Everyone else was healed. The Matan Torah was Moshe. Moshe was healed from a speech impairment. It says that any ailment when a person had, unfortunately, was afflicted with before Matan Torah, after Matan Torah, all the blind were able to see, all the deaf were able to hear, all the mutes were able to speak. And any other ailments that people had were healed, including Moshe's speech impairment. Okay, therefore we have to say, so but that happened Matan Torah. So what's the miracle now? The Rebbe says that the miracle happened in one of 2 ways. That Moshe's speech impairment left him only while he was in front of Pharaoh to give over the message of God. He was still affected. And therefore he complained about it because he wasn't healed. He was only able to do the mission. And therefore before and after he still has speech impairment. Or that he wasn't healed. He still had a problem. He couldn't speak. Nevertheless, Pharaoh was able to understand what he was saying. Even though he didn't speak clearly, Pharaoh understood him. Again, to the Rebbe says, why do you have to make such a miracle that Moshe had his speech impairment leave when he spoke to Pharaoh, or that Pharaoh was able to miraculously understand what he was talking about when you could have just killed him? That would have been an easier miracle. He could have been cured right away. So the question basically is kind of, we dabbled in and out in an idea here in Sif Aleph, but the questions that we've had basically was, what's the idea of all these great miracles around Moshe's being saved from the Egyptians? Why couldn't he just be invisible? And also when it comes to the speech, why do we find that Moshe had either a great miracle that he was able to speak only certain times, or a very great miracle that Pharaoh understood him better than just making it easy that he was healed? And this is based on the idea that if the idea is of this world is Gilui Likus, to reveal godliness, and Gilui Likus is beyond nature, beyond Teva. So in order to bring in any kind of Gilui, it needs avodah, and therefore miracles like avodah. So why is it that when it comes to avodah, basically, we're choosing for the harder avodah in order for Gilui Likus, then we can just get away with a smaller amount of avodah service that would also bring Gilui Likus. Okay, let's just do one. I think we could do a little bit. Let's see how much base is. Yeah, let's do at least till the end of this page. The Indian who that is like this. This is an idea that's brought down in the Torah. Who gives a mouth to the man, la'adam, bilamid kumutza, with the comments under the adam, which that's saying like the known person. Means the well-known person. This is an idea explained Torah that we learned this week. Shreim is al ha'adam ha'idua. Who's the adam ha'idu? Who's the known person? Means what's called adam kadmon. First man, meaning the origin of man, which is adam ha'alien, which is referring to Hashem. Mashkasav al-dmus ha'kisei, that prophet saw on the chair the mus mukamar adam, the image of man, which is referring to Hashem. The question is on itself. What does it mean that he saw on the chair the image of man? God has beyond any kind of form or image. The prophet saw the image of man. And then we start in the Maamar. There's two ways of bringing God, what is it in godliness in the world? There's what's called Mimale Kolam, how Hashem fills the world, and Saiviv Kolam, how Hashem encompasses the world. The Sovev is the godliness that has no form. But the way Hashem fills the world, and there's the idea of the image of man. And he's going to explain it at length. The base in Yonim and it's one thing. Although it doesn't make sense, how could it be encompassing, which encompassing means there is no image of man, with the form of man, and all be one, because God is beyond any kind of separation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu includes both ideas. The Kadosh is separate. That's the idea of Seivet. With Lashon Havdalah, the Kaya B'chinas Seivet, the Baruch is Amshalcha, and Baruch needs to come down, and comes down in the form. Mimale Kolam is like a body, soul fills the body, that it fills all the 248 limbs. Lashon Baruch of Amshalcha, to bring down. The Kaya Mimale, that's where Hashem fills the world. Seemingly the two opposites, either God is defined or not defined. They're in one name, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? Because these are different manifestations of Hashem. Even so, is the manifestation is not the essence. And essence is is beyond is the Anochi. And that we're going to get into. As Hashem will continue tomorrow with this idea further. Yom Tov and Tzlach Harabah. Thank you for joining.